with you a teaching from Pirkei Avot, which is the beginning of the Mishnah. Often these little lines get quoted from the chapters of our fathers. There are songs written about them. They're nice little pithy statements that often have profound meaning. And I want to start our study today by looking at that before we turn to the Torah portion itself. It's all Torah. But I want to share with you this one teaching and then just kind of get your thoughts about it. So let me share my screen. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right box. You ever done that? Share the wrong box? It's not good. Okay. So this teaching that's here in the box, if you could take a look, I'm just gonna adjust here. So there we go. Ben Azai said, be quick, hurry, run. It literally says run. Run to perform a minor commandment, a mitzvah, as in the case of a major one, and flee from transgression. For one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, and a transgression leads to another transgression. So, run to perform a mitzvah kala, a minor commandment or a light commandment, as with a major one, and flee from transgression. For one commandment leads to another commandment, and transgression leads to another transgression. Okay, just want to stop and see what jumps out at you from that.
I feel like they're all major.
All of the commandments?
The mitzvot.
Yeah. Right. So it's a weird qualification. What's a mitzvah kala? Seems like a strange thing to begin with. Okay, great. Cindy.
It kind of reminds me of pay it forward, that if someone does a good deed for you, then you should do a good deed for someone else. And that's a really nice cycle to start.
Wonderful. It's a nice cycle if it's the mitzvah part, not so much if it's transgression part.
Right.
Right? But it is a bit of pay it forward, and I think it can happen on the negative end as well. Douglas, hi. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I got it. I think human nature is to take the easiest course, which is to do nothing for anybody. And I think if we get in the habit of doing good deeds and being a nice person, it helps us to continue with that same thing, as opposed to if you're bad, you sort of stay on that road too.
It's a bit of inertia at play here, perhaps. Is that what you mean? Right. You get in the habit, and so then you just start doing it. Fantastic. Ben.
Thank you, Rabbi. To me, all these good deeds, even though some might be greater than others, they're good. So you want to do good and run to do good, and it doesn't really matter the scope of the good. You're running to do good.
Great. So you're saying it almost doesn't matter that the mitzvah kala qualification that's put there, that the light commandment or an easy commandment, whatever that means, almost didn't need to be there. If you're going to run to do it, run to do it. Is that what you're...
Right, because you're doing something good at mitzvah. You're doing a mitzvah, and we should do those wholeheartedly and with a lot of fervor.
Great. So we should run and do them wholeheartedly with another fervor, with a lot of fervor. Correct. And really, the truth is we should run to do them, whether they're easy or hard. But it says run. I think part of the reason the rabbis teach this is that maybe it's a little more obvious that when it's perceived to be a mitzvah that is big, and everybody that's obviously important, we're going to go and do it with all of our fervor. But maybe if it's so easy, we might take it for granted and might not do that. So there is
Rabbi,
Yes,
It's
Brad.
Brad. It's Brad. You know, I just want to add that Aristotle addressed this issue of how you become virtuous. And he said you become virtuous by practicing virtue. So it doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a little thing, it's the practice of the virtue that leads to a virtuous life.
That's right. That's exactly what the rabbis are saying in this little quotation, in this little piece from Pirkei Avot. And, not but, and there's this one little added element, and it's in that word that the translation didn't do a good job of saying, that we should run to it, right? Because Aristotle is making the same point. Get into the if you have the opportunity to do virtue, live a virtuous life. But how do we do it? It's not, oh, when I'm going to get to it, we should run to it. So we have a word for that, and it's a word that I want us to focus on as we look to our Torah portion today, and that word is zeal. Zeal. Quickly before, just a quick round. If anybody, when I say zeal, what comes to mind? Quick responses. I'm kind of curious what that evokes in people.
Excitement.
Excitement. Okay,
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Same thing, excitement.
Okay,
Enthusiasm. Enthusiasm.
enthusiasm. Great.
I think of zealotry, which has a pejorative sense for me.
Fantastic. I was waiting for someone to bring that up. Thank you. We're going to come back to that in just a moment, Brad. Panina, were you going to say something? You're muted, Panina.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. I think sometimes you think that you're doing it, but the zeal that you're talking about could be hurrying into doing something without really weighing how it will, what will be the result? How will it be affecting the person? That's why they say sometimes, don't give him a fish, teach him how to fish. So you have to, the zeal to do the good, you may be turning the other person into a moocher. You know what I mean?
To a moocher, correct. So I've never
So-
thought about zeal and moochers
So
in this
you need
idea, but
to
you're
weigh
right.
it, whether are you really doing him a favor by doing what you're doing. Like I said, instead of giving him a fish, teach him how to fish, to go and get it himself.
So this raises the question of, to what end does zeal exist in life? And in particular, the Torah is going to offer us a taste from our tradition, right? To what end does zeal exist? Maybe it creates a moocher. Maybe it makes the world a better place. Maybe, to Brad's point, when we think about zealotry, which obviously that comes from the word zeal, it can have terrible consequences. We see that, look in any history book or look in the newspaper, right? I mean, we know that there's a fine line. So we are going to look at two different places in this week's Torah portion that I believe that zeal shows up in this week's Torah portion. And what I want you to think about as we're going through today is just a question that should be simple and is not. What does zeal look like? What does zeal look like? So let's dive in, and actually to fully understand, to grasp this first example of zeal in the Torah portion, we actually have to look at the last handful of verses from last week's Torah portion, because the story gets split between two parshiot, between two separate Torah portions. Also, maybe worth having a conversation about, but maybe not. So why is this split? So we're going to look to Numbers chapter 25, and this beginning, again, like I said, is from last week's Torah, the end of last week's Torah portion. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the menfolk profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. I didn't check ID on the way in, but this is definitely adult content in the Torah. The Israelites are camping and they are whoring themselves with the women of Moab. Okay. And these women who invited the menfolk to the sacrifices for their God. The menfolk partook of them and worshipped that God. Thus, Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, this God, with a lowercase g, and Adonai, God with a capital G, was incensed with Israel. So I want to stop there for a second, make sure we're all on the same page. What's going wrong here? What's the issue at hand? Just on the very surface level. Cindy, go ahead.
That in order to have sex with these women, they are willing to worship an idol.
They are engaging in idolatry, whether it's so that they can have sex with these women, or these women they're having these relationships with, and then these women are having an idolatrous influence on them one way or another. It's kind of going south very quickly in two categories here. Great. Okay, so God was furious. And verse 4, Adonai said to Moses, take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled before Adonai, so that Adonai's wrath may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to Israel's officials, each of you slay those of his men who attach themselves to Baal Peor. So Moses is giving the commands, go and do this. And just then, in verse 6 here, just then a certain Israelite man came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Right? Why are they weeping?
Because their men are getting killed.
There's
Yes.
yes. Susan, what did you say?
That's what I was gonna say.
They're dying left and right? So this is such intense thing, yet it continued. This is going on. So when Phineas, but it's Pinchas in Hebrew, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest. So let me stop there for a moment just to point out the lineage there. Pinchas is the grandson of the high priest, of Aaron. So there's some lineage here, right? When he saw this whole crazy scene, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite man into the chamber, and he stabbed both of them, the Israelite man and the woman, through the belly, because we needed that detail, right? Then the plague against Israel, the Israelites, was checked. Those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. Okay, so I see heads shaking all over the place. This is what I just read to the end of last week's Torah portion. What's going on here?
Well,
go ahead, Cindy.
Well, my concern, though obviously this is written to get a message across, if we're told ours is a loving and forgiving God, I don't see that in God giving Moses this order.
Right, it's hard to see that. This is a very different God than El Rahum V'Chanun, God who is the compassionate, the compassionate and forgiving God. That's not what's going on here, right? So what's that about? Ben?
But hasn't God come down hard in other stories on people that don't worship the one God, worship people that have gone against God's commandment to worship just me? He's
This is
killed
not the
others.
first time.
Not the first time. So it's, yeah. expected behavior. He gets pissed, or he, she, it gets pissed.
God has is learning to get ahead of the temper, right? But because there's, to your point, Cindy, there's a lesson being taught here. And it just has to be named that it's not a lesson that goes down easily given our modern sensibilities. Right. And that's why as I was reading, I was watching all of you. I don't know if you were looking at the Zoom boxes, people's heads were shaking and nodding and all over. This is very, very disturbing stuff. Susan.
So I think our tradition doesn't hold that it's an all loving God all the time. I think God has the aspect of justice. And there's said if you're too, and of course there's the happy mean. If you're too compassionate, or too easygoing, you also allow evil in your midst. So, and there was no time at this point to take Pinchas and Cosby to trial. There was no imprisonment there either. But the time that they did it and the way that they acted was a flagrant rejection of the principles that they were to be attached to and the God they were to be attached to. So Pinchas took it in his own hands to administer that justice. And I think we can't think of, everything is good and lovely and people are all good and lovely.
Exactly. Yes, right. And the troubling part here, I want to go back to what I implied before.
Hi, I'm going to
Out a
have
little
the antipasti salad small.
That sounds delicious, Brad. The disturbing scene here is far from just God. God is not, there's so much going on here. I am not trying to pin blame on God whatsoever. There's a lesson that's being taught to us here. And I come back to this question of what does zeal look like? Because it's playing out here. And we could debate all day about to what end, but that's not really the question at hand. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, what has always bothered me about this is that we learned subsequently that Cosby isn't just any Midianite woman. She's the daughter of a chieftain. And you wonder to what extent she's being utilized, victimized by her own father to obtain a certain objective. So when she's impaled the way she is, I question whether there's justice here or whether there's some degree of zealotry going on, because we really haven't found out what her motivations were.
When you talk about zealotry, you mean on her behalf?
No, on Pinchas's behalf, acting quickly without getting to the bottom of what really is going on there.
That's right. And I don't remember who said before that when we were talking about zeal in general, that there is this idea of running to do a mitzvah, run to engage, that's zeal. And that's a virtue in Jewish tradition. But I can't remember who said before, there's also a danger in that if we run too quickly, we could create, it was Panina, you said we could create moochers, right? So there can be adverse consequences for sure. And yet, I should have said this before, but I'll say it now. Zeal, in Hebrew, zerizut, is a midah. It's one of the soul traits that's deemed to be a virtue in our tradition. So I believe that our Torah portion has a lot to teach us about how to ensure that zerizut, that zeal is a virtuous virtue, right? And not not something of danger. Susan, go ahead.
The whole issue, though, is one of degree and to which that zeal is directed. It's not it's good to have the energy and the desire and the passion, but then to which thing are you directing it? So the two considerations is how much does it go to the point of destruction, and does it go towards evil or towards good?
Right, right. It's not a blanket. It is a virtue to have zeal. Go have at it in the world, because, you know, what are we working toward here? So, and that's where God in the Torah is certainly creating the bounds, right? This is what we want. This is what we don't. Go ahead, Meryl.
I was just going to say that you can overdo your zeal,
Right.
which is pretty much what Susan just said.
Say
You
more
can
though
push,
in your context.
you can push so hard to want to be excited about something that it could be offensive to someone.
Right.
You're not necessarily looking at how they might feel about the issue.
Right, because so much of that, when we are so focused in, we lose kind of our peripheral vision. Douglas.
Zeal can be, like everybody said, can be turned into an obsession. And as with all mitzvot, we have to be on the moderate, the golden mean.
That's right. These midot, these virtues, these soul traits, we all have the idea of these soul traits in our tradition is that we all have them in different measure, but we are challenged as human beings in trying to live our lives more holy, is to find that right balance. Because there's a reason zeal puts a smile on our face, but when we hear the word zealot, we think just the opposite, to your point. Panina, and then we're going to go back to the text.
I'm trying to figure out the word in Hebrew, zrizut. Okay, zrizut means do it with enthusiasm. Do it like, it's also like you have fun when you're doing it. Somebody who is zariz is somebody who is like happy to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see here any negative thing. It's just something that will be reflecting on the giver. So the giver has to do it to start from the idea of enthusiasm. Just do it, but do it with enthusiasm. Like you also feel it's not supposed to be like a chore when you are doing it. It's like, don't give it too much thought even. It's be anxious to do it. But it means like not anxious, mad anxious, but just be enthusiastic. That's what I'm trying to say. That's all.
Right.
Just do it with enthusiasm.
Right.
So
Run
that's what I'm trying the Hebrew word to weigh into it. The rest of it, I guess it's something that every rabbi is going to be able to do it in his own way, whatever he thinks. So I'm looking at the Hebrew. That's it.
Well, it's helpful to keep that in mind. And that word is not used in the Torah here, but it's clear. I mean, this is kind of the paradigm of zealotry, a paradigm of zealotry given to us in the Torah. So that is where, in this very disturbing scene, that's where last week's Parsha leaves off. So now let's turn to this week's Torah portion, and it picks right up where it left off. And we get in the first few verses of this week's Torah portion, I believe, some added color to this picture of what does zeal look like. Okay. So the plague has ended. Plague of 24,000 has ended, and Parshat Pinchas begins. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Say therefore, I grant him my covenant of peace. This is God granting Pinchas as a reward God's Brit Shalom, Briti Shalom. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. Okay, so Pinchas does this, the plague, it calms God down because God is outraged, incensed. It calms God down. And in doing this, running in and doing this gory thing, God calms down, the plague ends, and his reward, Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace. So what do we learn from this, just at first glance, about how our tradition wants us to understand Pinchas's actions? Okay.
Well, God saw it as good.
God saw it as good. So how would you define Pinchas? How would you, again, what does zeal look like? Zeal is a good thing. God saw it as good. So what was it that was so good about what Pinchas did?
So, Benjamin, you want to go?
Thank you. I'm just thinking, God, to murder two people is good. Okay, I have a little trouble wrestling with that, but Pinchas sort of cut the cancer out of this, you know, not following God. So maybe that's the good part. It's tough to balance for me.
So maybe so part of what he did was being able to do the hard task to stop the greater sin.
And talk about zeal, his act of the sword through the belly there's a lot of zeal. That's a lot of intent.
Yes, that doesn't happen passively. Right? Okay, fantastic. Susan and then Brad.
So, yeah, I think, I mean, there's several things here. On the one hand, sometimes to stop evil, you need to have war. And in this case, this is an individual action, but also, that's one aspect of it. There were 24,000 people who died. I mean, look at that number. It wasn't just one or two. It was, the men going against God and everything that he was supposed to do. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is zeal going too far, including God's zeal. So Pinchas tempered it, and there would be peace. And then God said Pinchas would be a promoter of peace, which would temper Pinchas's zeal, because now he's in the temple and he has to perform.
So it's not just a certificate handed over. There is this agreement given. And so they're both bound to this.
And they're both tempered their zeal.
That's great. So thank you for adding. So there is something very insidious going on in the society, cannot be allowed to continue. Pinchas comes in, all of the emotions are on supercharge. And then that's when this zeal is kicking in, because it's easy to run it, to go back to this teaching from Pirkei Avot, to run to do a mitzvah. It's easy to run when the adrenaline has kicked in and we see something really terrible going on. Question is, what does that look like when we're not in that hot moment? Brad, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm just picking up on the emotion and the use of the word passion. I think the word passion comes up twice in that passage. Is that what is the Hebrew, and is that the same word that means zeal? Does it mean both? Are those interchangeable words or synonyms or?
On 1 second, let me share my screen and we're going to find it together here. Where are we looking? His passion for me. Go ahead. So yes, it is and anybody can jump in and help me. It does mean passionate. God, the phrase is given when describing God. God is a passionate God. So kin'ah, and so I don't know if that adds anything, Brett.
So are you saying that Pinchas exhibited a godly quality in his passionate response?
Well, oh, that's fascinating because it's the same word that's used to describe God. Is that what you
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there is some, excuse me, there is some element of that. If God can be described as this, as a description for God, Pinchas doesn't have this as a description, but he acted with it. So there is a concept that we're supposed to imitate God, imatio Dei, right? So Pinchas is doing something that imitates a description of God. Of course, it's in his actions, right? Which is fantastic and also makes the modern person reading this a little bit nervous because we live in a world where zealots leave terrible trails of destruction. But for the purpose, their understanding of what is holy, I guess, or what of what their understanding of what should happen. So I want to go back to this, Susan, I think maybe you said it, about this covenant of peace as a reward, because I think at first glance, as a modern person reading this, and of course you are all much more steeped in this and have more nuance to this, but if you really were to come at this from the outside with no real background in understanding how to read Torah, you could look at this and say, what is going on here? This terrible crime has happened, and Pinchas is being rewarded with God's covenant of peace. And of course, we know there's more to it than that. And Susan, you picked up on something that I want us to come back to. What is a brit shalom? What's a covenant of peace? And this Hasidic master, Rav Natan, says, after the great zealousness that he acted upon for God, God gives him, he's referring to Pinchas, as a gift, the covenant of shalom. It is as if the Torah is hinting that the path of shalom is always preferable to and more successful than the path of zealousness and war. So, how do we reconcile this? How do you understand the brit shalom? Go ahead, Penina.
Two people have to agree to it. When you do a brit shalom, you have to consider what are the motives of the other one in order to make an agreement. A brit is a commitment, an agreement on both sides. That's why when you do the circumcision, you call it a brit milah brit. This is a contract that you're signing with God, that this is what you're going to follow. You follow his ways. So brit shalom means that two people have to agree. It's not enough that you want to do it. The other one has to agree to accept it.
Correct. It's a sacred relationship is a brit, and it does take two players,
Right.
both of whom have to buy in here.
Right.
So
the other side could think that it's just something that you impose on him, and he may not want it. So it's important that the other person should be just as willing and enthusiastic about it.
great. So where does that fit here, though? Look what has just happened, and God and Pinchas are entering into this special relationship of shalom.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, this may be a stretch, Rabbi, but sometimes you have to sacrifice one or two for the greater good. And a general might say, well, I'm going to let these people, these soldiers die, but it's going to save my army or save my country. Is this agreement, this Brit, you'll kill two Pinchas, but you'll save the Israelites?
So I think, and that's the light that's being shown on this, shined onto this, right? That's the way we're supposed to hear it. And yet, when you look at this, this is R-rated Torah, right? For violence, right? It's very disturbing stuff. And yet, it seems like this intimate and sacred covenant that is being established here. There's something to this, because maybe it's a reward, but the more I look at it, I think, maybe it's a challenge. They're both in this together. Pinchas and God are both challenging themselves to pursue shalom, even if what has to happen in the short term doesn't on the road to pursuing shalom, it might mean in the short term it doesn't look like shalom, and I'm not excusing it. I'm right. It just sometimes, to your point, these sacrifices have to be made. So we don't know. This is beyond our scope. But what do we know about what zeal looks like in this little scene? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just like your definition then. Is it a promise or a challenge? And the reality of life on this earth is there are continuous challenges and challenges to peace. So I like that. I thought of this covenant as a promise. There'd be peace. God will be peaceful and not destroy the people again. Or have them destroyed, but it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to human beings continuously. Shalom bayit, shalom here, and we see this right now in our lives, unfortunately, on a dramatic scale to the Jewish people. But it's a hope for peace, because it could be both.
Well, they're on the hook for it, right? Because they're entering into this covenant. I mean, think about the first time in the Torah, there was destruction. God wanted to destroy the world, and then a covenant came.
Right, but the rainbow.
The rainbow, exactly. And still to this day, when we see a rainbow, we're supposed to say a blessing to God who remembers the covenant, because a covenant isn't a contract that's signed once and tucked in a file drawer. A covenant is something that we are continually held accountable to, and it's not always easy. So certainly working toward shalom is not always easy. And I would say that when in an instance like this horrific story with Pinchas, when there is this we talked earlier about the fine line between what the connotations that come when we hear the word zeal and the connotations that come when we hear the word zealotry. When we're tinkering in, if it is in fact, and we'll leave this as a question mark, but if it is in fact a sacrifice these two people were being sacrificed for that's not really a question mark. It is. They were being sacrificed. Well, they died and the plague ended, right? So the Israelite people were not destroyed. So, but even putting the toes in the water of any violence it is that we start to get a little nervous, because we're on that fine line between zeal, what gets connoted, the connotations of zeal and the connotations of zealotry. Okay, so a little upsetting, a little disturbing, but the Torah is telling us that Pinchas ran to do God's will because there was something really insidious happening, really terrible happening. It pleased God. God entered into this sacred partnership. to work toward shalom, this covenant of peace. This is, for all that that is, one place where I believe zeal is on display. Zeal, a virtue in our tradition. Skip to the end of this week's Torah portion. This one's a little more easily digestible, I guess, in modern sensibilities. And this is the story of Zelophehad's daughters.
Oh, yeah.
So for those who are not familiar, I can't even remember how many verses I put here. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and read it so that we're all on the same page about what is happening here. This has to do with the division of land, in the promised land. The daughters of a guy named Zelophehad of the Menashite family, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Menashe, son of Joseph, right? So this is through Joseph's line. These daughters came forward. And I love that the Torah, I'm just going to say this, even though it's not really on topic. I love that the Torah bothers to name these women. Doesn't tell us a lot, describe each one of them, but it names them because it gives us a hint that these women are about to do, that they're important. And their names were Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction of Korach's faction, which banded together against God, but he died for his own sin, and he had left no sons. Let not your father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen," right? Kinsmen. He had only daughters, Zelophehad, no sons, and the land apportionment is happening, and none is given to these 5 women. And they came and they brought the case to Moses. And Moses brought their case before God. And God said to Moses, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a householder dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter." Okay, so the precedent is set here. So what did they do? What did these women do? They spoke truth to power. They saw an injustice happening. Now it was happening to them. They went to Moses and said, "Hold on a second." And they made their case that they deserve to inherit this land. And then what happens? Moses doesn't know what to do with this. Moses goes to God. God knows what to do with it. And God says, their plea is just. And let this be the precedent. Great, nice, neat. This one's really easy with our, like I said, our modern Western sensibilities to say that's lovely. Brad, go ahead.
Well, what is this saying about Moses? This is a property dispute, and yet he feels the need to elevate this to God. Are we seeing already a weakened Moses at this point, enfeebled Moses? I mean, this is not the type of issue that you would think should require him to go to God. This is something he should be able to decide on his own.
That's a very good question. I once had in my prior something, I may have said this before, I had a person I used to study with quite a bit, and he used to like to say that Moses is like the picture of the middle manager in cases like this, right? Moses, the ultimate middle manager. So, in some places, yes, and in some places, no. I think I would add a question to your question, Brad, and that is whether this is one of those things all under the question of, does this require elevation to God, to higher management, right? But how important is the division of land? And we know from the precedent set in earlier stories of the Torah, and certainly where we're going from here, how critically important this is. So you raise a very good question. Maybe, or maybe Moses was simply stumped, because here was something, there was something, and maybe with this, we'll open it up for conversation. There was something about what they did that left Moses without an automatic answer. And I believe it had to do with what they made zeal look like. So what was it that they did that had Moses stumped here? Susan, go ahead.
I several issues here with Brad's point, not issues with the point, I think it was a good point, but I think we've seen Moses being weakened in this. And I think I just read a little of Rabbi Sachs, who said Moses, with the Pinchas, Moses was weakened there. He didn't stop this idolatry and sex. It had to be a stronger leader at that point of a younger generation. So with Brad's point, this is a business proposition. I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but he also was weakened there too. And your point is land was important, for goodness sakes. They did a lot with the who's going to get which land and who's going to be on this side of the Jordan or that side of the Jordan, with Reuben and the others. So I think those are all very interesting points that were raised, but also there's an interest of, I think, as bracketing stories. The first one is Pinchas exacting justice with the sword, and the one with Zelophehad is justice discussed, and then and taken to God, and then peace being given. And it cost these daughters their radical stance for women to go before Moses and saying we want our share is like the start of women's lib, I guess, or something.
Well, they are held out, really. This is a radically ahead of its time story, right? That this precedent was set. Of course, it goes back a little bit later, but they stepped forward, and I would argue that they did that because they had zeal for what was just and what was right and what was owed to them. Now, you could also say, wait a minute, their zeal only came because they had a self-interest, but I think it was more than that. Ben, you had your hand up, and then Penina.
Well, I think it's similar to what you just said, Rabbi, where for these women to speak up at the time, I don't know if it's the first time, but it's just not the normal of the time. So what zeal and strength they must have had to even speak up, because for women to get property, I mean, it took literally thousands of years for that to be normal.
Right. And I wonder what would have happened. We will never know. There is no answer to this question of if they had gone and spoken up, but not with such, maybe zeal could have described the way they approached it. Right? What if they said, oh, what about us? One of those. So maybe part of their zeal had to do with their ability to see what others couldn't see. And actually, I closed the page, but that was Rashi's comment, that their gift was that they could see, their eyes could see what Moses couldn't see. And that was that there was something wrong. The system was broken, and they had the ability to see it. And that is part of what defined their zeal. They saw it and they acted on it. Penina, go ahead.
I think that when he wrote the Ten Commandments, I was wondering that if in his mind, did he write the Ten Commandments just for men or for everybody? So all of a sudden now those two are taking advantage of the idea that there is a yes and a no. There is something you could do and some things that you can't, and they're actually lawful. And then before that, you do have the laws that were given how to treat the land. Remember that you have to let it rest and you have to give it back. So they already heard these things that you got to give back after 10 years to the original owner. So
Right.
they didn't come from a hole. They had base. They already heard the law before. And now nobody said that it was only for men. It was a law. So he had to follow. They had to literally follow in the whole idea of the words of the Ten Commandments and the whole laws of the land or whatever. They just brought it into, what do you call it, practicality. That's it. The law was there. They were supposed to get what was theirs.
So
And
maybe we're
Oh.
going out of chronology here, but maybe they were the daughters of Zelophehad were doing what the rabbis of Pirkei Avot say, which is they were running to do a mitzvah because this was the way the system should be, perhaps.
actually followed the law. They followed what he said. They have to return the loan to the owner after a certain time. Well, he's dead, so now they have to get
Yeah, so
it.
who gets it now? Great. Okay, Brad and then Cindy. You're muted, Brad.
When I read the story, I was thinking more of the word agency rather than zeal. The women were showing agency. And then I started thinking about what is really the difference between agency and zeal. And to me, it's the emotional, the
Right.
passion element is the distinction between the two. And I'm not seeing the passion element in this passage. I mean, you seem to be seeing it. I don't see it. I see them showing agency.
Well, I'm stepping out a bit to say, look, the story of Pinchas is often associated with zeal. This is a picture of what zeal looks like. Let's unpack it with Pinchas, as we've done. I'm offering that this story gives a different, maybe some extra ingredients to what zeal can look like. But you're right. And I'm glad you raised this, Brad, because it doesn't look anything. Well, first of all, the issues are very different, but change is being made in both of these stories, right? In very different ways and for very different purposes. The change is being made. These women, I haven't thought about it in terms of agency. Often the work of this story of Zelophehad's daughters is understood in the context of kind of a systematic approach to pursuing justice, right? There's a system, you figure out how to work the system, you think it through. This was very thought through, as opposed to Pinchas, who like took the spear and stabbed, right? There was a lot of stepping back from the emotion and also using forethought and planning. And I guess what I'm stepping out a bit today to say, I believe that there is zeal in both those are different ways that zeal can show up. Cindy, go ahead.
So just to clarify in my mind that they're still wandering and that when they are claiming their inheritance, it's for in the future, when they arrive in Israel, this unknown portion will be assigned to them and their descendants, which they wouldn't have been if they didn't demand this.
Right. And so so the stakes are high. Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Susan.
I don't see them wandering. They were at Moab, weren't they? Oh, they will be wandering, but they're at this.
This is not. Yeah, they're not in the throes of setting up camp, pulling down camp, setting up camp, pulling down camp, but they're setting these precedents that will stay with them, right? And thinking ahead to how is the land apportionment going to be when they cross over the Jordan?
Right.
Penina.
I'm thinking now that going back to all the stories, we always say that we think, I know my daughter thinks it, that the women didn't have place too much important or weight in decisions and in the families altogether. But all those stories, right now I'm thinking about it, they shows us totally the opposite.
Yeah.
Sarah was very strong-willed. Rebecca did so. It shows you a lot of women power in all the stories from the beginning. So I am now going to start, when people are telling me that women didn't have a place in the ancient times, this is baloney. The story of Esther, the story, like one by one, in every chapter, in every 2 pages, you're going to find something about one woman or another that's doing amazing things that are going to be leaving an impression for a lifetime. So, and their stamp on it. So I really, truly think that that's it. From now on, whenever I think that women were backwards in those days or took a back seat, I'm just disagreeing now to this whole idea.
I think that great. It stands out. The reason this story of Zelophehad's daughter stands out is because it stands out. The fact that, and I said as I was reading it, that these women are named. They're named. There are so many women integrated into the narrative of the Torah who don't have names. And so there's something here to notice. Okay, Rebecca, and then I want to look at a couple other things before we run out of time.
Just building on what Tanina said, I love Numbers. The book of Numbers is like one of my favorite, and this is probably one of my favorite sections, because also named in this section of Pinchas is the daughter of Asher, Sarah.
Oh, Sarah, yeah.
Sarah Bat Asher. Great, thank you. Susan, was your hand up from before or something else?
No, I was just gonna applaud Penina, and I said I agree with you, and I think that's a modern feminist sensibility, is that women have been oppressed for since they were born. But Eve was a heroine in the first place. So
There you go.
and all the others, you look at the Torah, they were all clever and good, and Rebecca and Sarah and so on. So I
And
think
strong and independent.
Strong
Sarah
and
had her own tent. When she got mad at him, she left him and she went to live in her own tent in Hebron. She was a princess. She had her own domain. It's like,
I think they weren't corporate executives and glass ceiling, but this was different times, and
But this particular story really stands out because they had the vision, they had the voice, and they had the access. And I would argue they had the zeal that, and this is my layer, right? I believe they had the zeal that encouraged them to use all of those things to make change. And it's very different from the zeal that's outlined, that is much more clearly outlined at the beginning of the story. Brad, I see your hand. I want to show one, I want to look at two other things, but they're not text, they're images, they're pictures that I think have a little bit more to offer us. Again, the overarching question is what is zeal in our tradition as expressed in this Torah portion? And what do we do with it? Why do we care? And I think it has a very profound lesson for us today in this crazy world of ours. And I know I say that every time I come into Torah study, but it hasn't changed. But there's something here. And for this, I want us to go back to two hints that are in the Torah itself when we look at the story of Pinchas. What are we learning about zeal, right? The good, the bad, the fine line when our emotions are ahead of our brains, which also, and these stories about mothers lifting cars off of their children. Amazing things can happen when adrenaline starts going and when our emotions take over. And it also is a little dangerous, right? But amazing things can happen. And that in contrast to the daughters of Zelophehad, who thought it through and had a systemic approach to making change. Okay. Thing number one comes in the name of Pinchas as it's in the Torah. Can everybody see this Hebrew here? Okay, so I want to look in particular. It's a little hard to tell here because I don't have a basis for comparison, but the commentators have all pointed out that this yud right there, right, that yud in Pinchas's name is smaller than the other yuds in the Torah. Every other yud in the Torah probably would come down, I'm pointing, you can't see, to about here, but this one is smaller. So
that's not all that's wrong with this word. Why is the chet divided? A chet supposed to be a solid top on the top.
I think that's pretty standard.
Then the printer was not
Okay.
properly.
I don't know the answer to that, Penina, but the commentators have pointed out the yud is smaller. And what do we know about the letter yud? It is the core of God's name.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Adonai, right? So the tradition looks to this and says, wait, this is not a mistake. This is this way, because as much as Pinchas was rewarded and Pinchas did good to stop this plague, Pinchas was a zealot, and Pinchas was stepping over that fine line just a little bit to make us nervous. And when that happens, God, as represented through the yud here, is just a little bit minimized. Not that Pinchas shouldn't be celebrated, that's a different debate. But the commentators look at this smaller yud and say, wait a minute, God is just a little bit minimized when this violence happens. Because guess what? Pinchas may have stopped this plague, but Pinchas also killed people. And when human beings die, so does a little bit of God. So maybe there's a lesson in that. Okay. The other textual piece, and this all has to do with the way the scribes write a Torah scroll, goes back to the phrase Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace. I'm going to scroll down and show you what the word shalom in Brit Shalom in this part of the Torah looks like, and tell me what you notice. It's these words right there. Now I'm going to undo it. What do you notice about the word shalom, whether you're a Hebrew reader or not? Here's specifically shalom.
The vav is cut off.
It's broken.
It is broken. The vav is broken. And this is not an error in any one Torah scroll. This is what it looks like in every Torah scroll.
Does the vav stand for a human standing upright?
It does now. I love that.
Yeah, I see that.
It could. Yes, that there's something broken. And the work that we have in our sacred relationship with God, that Pinchas has, and that we have in covenant with God, to work for shalom is to put those different pieces back together. Because there's an understanding that even though it says he was rewarded with this Brit Shalom, it's not a fait accompli. It's a challenge to do the work.
Yeah.
And I believe that when we're talking about zeal, this is the Torah's way of reminding us that part of what has to get answered is and I think Brad maybe said this at the beginning, or maybe Douglas, it was the motivation what motivates us to have zeal? The other part is, what's the object? What's on the other side? What do we do with our zeal? And if we are not motivated by the work of shalom, the work of covenant, by the work of building godliness in the world, then it's a very, very dangerous thing. But if we're in this breed, in this covenant, and everyone's doing the work of this covenant, then we're working toward good. And then zeal is good. Because remember, Pirkei Avot says, we run to do a mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, right? We get into the habit of doing it. We also inspire other people to do mitzvot. But the last part of that statement is an averah, a transgression, leads to more transgressions. Okay. So the Torah is reminding us very clearly that with our zeal, we need to stay on the right side of this equation. And how do we do that? In covenant. And then we can put that little line back together. So it is a challenge. It is not a fait accompli. I don't believe it was for Pinchas. It certainly is not for us. And then when we get to next week's Torah portion, we'll see that even the amazing accomplishments of Zelophehad's daughters, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's kind of life. So tune in next week. I don't know who's teaching next week, so I don't know. But read next week. It's worth it. Okay. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Heavy,
Thank
heavy.
you.
Thank
Shabbat
you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom,
Shabbat
everybody.
shalom, Rabbi.
I don't know how to do this. Okay.